Welcome to the Health, Habits, and Epic Living podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sherry Price. The goal of this podcast is to educate and enable empowered women to take the next step towards achieving their health, wellness, and lifestyle goals. Let's get started. Hello, my epic friend. I have an amazing podcast for you today. I am welcoming my friend, Morgan Nolte, to the podcast, and she is going to talk about all the things surrounding insulin resistance and how we can take measures in our life right now to prevent disease, to prevent heart attacks, to prevent diabetes, to prevent cancers. And all this information is in this episode. Dr. Morgan Nolte is a board-certified clinical specialist in geriatric physical therapy, recognizing a lack of preventative education and care that focused on reversing risk factors instead of just treating symptoms. Dr. Nolte founded Zivly, an online course and coaching program that helps adults reverse insulin resistance for long-term weight loss and disease prevention. Dr. Nolte's content has reached millions of people through her podcast and YouTube channel, which now has over 100,000 subscribers. She's been a guest lecturer for local physical therapy departments, state and national physical therapy organizations, and has been a guest addressing insulin resistance on top-rated wellness podcasts, including the Everyday Wellness by Cynthia Thurlow, the Ultimate Health Podcast, and the Drew Prowett Show. That's how I became exposed to know about the excellent work that Dr. Morgan Nolte does. So please enjoy this episode with Dr. Nolte and myself. Well, hello, Dr. Morgan Nolte. Welcome to the Health Habits and Epic Living podcast. I am such a big fan of yours, and it is such an honor to have you on my podcast today.
Thank you, Sherry. I mean, the feeling's mutual because you came on my show and it was so nice to get to know you there. So I'm excited to bring some value back to your audience.
Yeah, super excited. So to get started, in the intro, I discussed how you've transitioned from physical therapy, so a healthcare practitioner out there in the real world, treating patients mainly in the geriatric realm. And then you started this company. And so I'd like you to talk about, how did that idea form for you and what motivated you to start this company?
Yeah, so I love talking about this. I think as a geriatric physical therapist, I saw firsthand the negative downstream effects of insulin resistance, which is really what we focus on. And many people don't know what that is. We're going to get into it in this episode, but essentially it's the root cause of diabetes. It's a root cause of Alzheimer's disease and cardiovascular disease and dementia and some cancers and obesity. And my heart just kept breaking slowly. The way that I reflect upon it now is I felt like my hands were tied and my mouth was muzzled in geriatric physical therapy because we are so limited in this country by what insurance will reimburse. So insurance often dictates the care that can be provided, how much care, what type of care. If it's not covered by insurance, a company's not going to do it. And what I realized was having this exercise tunnel vision, this mobility tunnel vision, was always going to feel to me like it was too little too late. Because I knew that if I could work with my geriatric patients in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s, before they had this end-stage disease, before they had the stroke, before they had the heart attack, before they had the fall and fracture, we could have made so much more headway and we could have prevented a lot of the stuff that I was seeing. We could have prevented a lot of the medications that they needed. However, exercise alone wasn't going to cut it, and physical therapy alone wasn't going to cut it. I think that physical therapists are wonderful and we serve a place. It just wasn't the place I wanted to be anymore because I felt so emotionally burnt out, knowing that my calling was to help people prevent disease. And I wasn't able to live that out within that traditional insurance mode. So I started my own practice to really be able to expand my scope and practice in this wellness space of nutrition and stress management and sleep and physical activity and mindset, because it's all very important to prevent the need for a geriatric PT in the first place, to really get and stay healthy as soon as possible, because you get to reap the higher quality of life for years and years and years to come. You get to save so much time, so much energy, so much money on avoiding illness because, man, it is expensive financially, physically, emotionally to be sick. And so I really wanted to help people prevent that.
I love that. I think that's why I'm so connected to you and so aligned with your message, because as a pharmacist, I would feel similarly, right? I think there's this mentality that I would see a lot as if I could just find the right magic pill. I can lose the weight. I can, have a healthier life. I can find the right pain medicine so I am out of pain. But realizing we're catching things way too late. And there's so much more that can be done from lifestyle management and habits and the things that you truly can adopt earlier and make routine in your life that sets you up for beautiful golden years, not frail golden years. And so I think we're aligned in that, and that we wanted to help people much earlier. And a lot of that comes down to education. And so I'm a big fan of your way you show up on social media and the posts that you do. They're so simple. They're so easy to understand. And so I'd love for you just to describe to the audience a little bit more about what insulin resistance is. We talked about some of the downstream complications if we're not savvy, and like how we can, what markers you look at or how people can identify if they are becoming more insulin resistant.
Yeah. So insulin, first off, it's a vital hormone. We all need it to survive. So it's a hormone made by your pancreas, and it has a lot of different jobs in the body, but the one that I focus on most is blood sugar regulation. And so I want you to think about somebody who's a type 1 diabetic. That means that their pancreas has completely stopped producing insulin. And this used to be a fatal disease before we learned about synthetic insulin and insulin injections. And it used to be called the wasting disease. So somebody with type 1 diabetes, they could eat and eat and eat, they could drink, and they wouldn't gain weight. Why? Because they didn't have any insulin. And they had very high blood sugar levels. So they're at a very high risk of blood sugar related things like neuropathy, retinopathy, kidney disease, that kind of stuff, if their blood sugars don't get under control. So not only does insulin help lower your blood sugar levels, keep them in a healthy range, but it's also your fat creation and storage hormone. It tells your body to move the energy that you eat, like what to do with that. What do I do with the protein? What do I do with the carbs? Do I make muscle? Do I make fat tissue? So I like to call it your fat creation and storage hormone. Again, type 1 diabetics used to be the wasting disease. They didn't have any insulin. We need some insulin to survive. But in our modern lifestyle, we are secreting way too much insulin. We are demanding way too much insulin from our pancreas. And when that happens, our cells become resistant to the effects of insulin. It's just like we become desensitized all the time to stuff in our environment. Whenever we're exposed to something on a frequent basis, you're going to become desensitized to it. So, for example, I'm a parent of young children, and after a while, you just kind of learn to tune out the whining or tune out the crying. Like we become desensitized to our children's complaining or whining, and I'm trying to at least. Or another good example is antibiotic resistance. Like if you've taken multiple rounds of an antibiotic, your body's not going to be sensitive to that anymore. You're going to have to take a different antibiotic. You know that, you're a pharmacist. So I think you probably have so many great examples of drug resistance. Same thing happens with the hormone insulin. When you are demanding so much insulin from an unhealthy lifestyle, such as a high carbohydrate, high processed food diet, drinking a bunch of pop, even a little bit of pop will stimulate a big insulin response, chronic sleep deprivation, being stressed out all the time, and being physically inactive. These are the things that really drive insulin resistance. So when that happens, your cells become resistant. Well, then what? So your pancreas produces more and more and more to get the job done. To keep your blood sugars in a healthy level, it has to use more insulin. But over time, your pancreas can only produce so much. Your cells become desensitized, and that's really when we're going to start to see a rise in blood sugar. But the key that I love to educate on is you're going to see this background rise in insulin 10 to 20 years before you're going to see a rise in your blood glucose or your hemoglobin A1C. So insulin, checking for fasting insulin is like the early predictor for type 2 diabetes. It can predict the disease 10 to 20 years before glucose and A1C, and most physicians still aren't checking for it, which is crazy. And I think the important thing to know is you can get your own insulin checked. You don't need a primary care provider. We sell insulin tests on our website. That's an at-home finger prick test. You can go to Ulta Lab Tests, so ULTA Lab Tests. You can just Google them and then Google insulin. They have like a $30 insulin test. You can get that at a local lab. You can talk to your physician about it, but don't be surprised if they look at you like you're crazy or you have two heads, because a lot of physicians still are not aware of the benefits of checking fasting insulin. And they might say, well, we just use hemoglobin A1C. And in your mind, I want you to think, well, that's a downstream indicator. That doesn't give me enough of a heads up. And that's why people are being blindsided with prediabetes diagnosis and diabetes diagnosis, because they're not checking insulin. So that's one of my biggest take-home points today is if you don't know you're fasting insulin, please go ahead and get it checked, because if you have a normal glucose or a normal hemoglobin A1C, you may still have insulin resistance. So we want to have the earliest possible indicator for diabetes. So get your insulin checked.
I love that advice so much. I learned that as well, listening to other people's podcasts, and I had mine checked because I just want to know, right? I want to know if there's things I could do now that could prevent me from developing type 2 diabetes. I know my mom has it. I know there could be, but not always, a genetic predisposition. But those numbers and those values actually motivate me to make change. So I love that you're suggesting that, and you gave us ways to test for it, because you're right. My primary care physician didn't know anything about it. And so I had to find unique ways to get that tested and measured. And so I can know what my risk of developing metabolic dysfunction is. And interestingly, when I walk clients through their labs, right, a lot of times, like I had just talked to someone who didn't know that they were in the pre-diabetes range with their hemoglobin A1C. Her physician never mentioned a thing that she was on the track for developing type 2 diabetes. And here she works out 3 days a week, right? So she thinks she has this healthy lifestyle. She's not told anything about her lab work. But when we went over her lab work, I just wanted her to know, hey, this is a marker that's looking like maybe we need to do a little bit more now so that you can have a healthier lifespan going forward. So I love that we're breaking down the numbers and how to test that for yourself, because you and I are both like, let's be advocates for our own health and not just put it into the hands of others. So with that, we know the data out there about metabolic dysfunction, right? We know that it's now less than 7% of the United States adults are metabolically healthy. What are some of the things that you look for that tell you that this patient could be more metabolically healthy?
Yeah, I always look to some basic blood work I think is helpful. So fasting insulin, I like to look at their glucose level. Really, an optimal glucose level is fasting is less than 90. So if yours is creeping up into the mid to upper 90s, even though you're in the normal range, I think that's still too high. Blood pressure, anything greater than 120 over 80 is a concern for me. Triglycerides, I like to see them under 100. HDL for women, I like to see over 50. I like to see that over 40 for men. And then waist circumference kind of varies. I'd have to look up the specifics, but there are certain cutoffs for waist circumference. People usually know, like if you have belly fat or if you don't, but if you do, that's going to be another sign for insulin resistance. Those are some clinical markers, and I would highly encourage people to take a little screenshot of this episode so that you can take note of the timestamp and then go back and review your own blood work. So really look if your A1C and your glucose, if they are in the pre-diabetic range or the diabetic range, you absolutely have insulin resistance. We need to do something about it. But even if they're in the normal range, take a look at those other numbers, because sometimes blood pressure, high blood pressure is one of the first signs of insulin resistance. You may know this from your experience, but when somebody has insulin resistance, you know how there's usually like a sequela of medications that come on board? One for that. This is really what cued me in as a geriatric PT was I would do these, H&P reviews, history and physical reviews before an eval. And I thought, why does no one just have diabetes? Why does nobody just have high blood pressure? Why is somebody like never just on a statin? There's always this triad of metabolic issues, which to me really cued me in that there's an underlying root cause for all of them, which turns out to be insulin resistance. And so in your experience, what were blood pressure medications or cholesterol medications or blood sugar medications usually the first to be prescribed? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think it comes back to how they manage their lifestyle. Oftentimes, people just refuse to see a physician, right? Until things get really bad or things get really painful. Sometimes it could be just like, I'm having GERD or heartburn, and that's what brings them to the doctor. And then all of a sudden you're, putting them on traditional medicine, PPI, right? And so you're like, oh, well, I don't know if that's the best thing we should be doing nowadays, right? There's more effective strategies that don't come with long-term sequelae. But it might be, that GERD that brings them in, and then you start testing for other things. Then it's, oh, you have also high blood pressure. Oh, you have also cholesterol that's elevated, and so it can sometimes come on just because somebody hasn't been taking care of themselves and routinely getting checked until the pain is so great. So sometimes it's that. A lot of times I would see the blood pressure would be elevated first in the most healthy individuals that are taking care of themselves. And then it would be the later sequelae coming with the cholesterol meds and the diabetic meds. But usually if you're insulin resistant or quote pre-diabetes now, it comes with a lot of other things because as you know, that high insulin and that high blood sugar comes with inflammation. Yeah. So now you're going to have arteries that are inflamed, which is going to make them more stiff, which leads to high blood pressure. So just that baseline inflammation causes your joints to be achy, just causes your body to start to react to that inflammatory response. And you get all these symptoms, which in traditional medicine, they will say, oh, you need an endocrinologist and then a cardiologist. And nobody's really bringing it back to that root cause, like you have said. So what are some of the ways when people first identify like, yes, my fasting insulin is high, or my blood sugar is high, or my hemoglobin A1C is high? What are some of the ways that you first work with somebody to manage and get ahead of this condition to put it into remission if possible?
Well, the first thing is control the carbohydrates, especially added sugar. And I'm telling people this in order of what I believe is going to be most effective from a blood sugar standpoint. This isn't necessarily how I recommend implementing. I always usually start with mindset with my clients and with our Zibly members, but I want to give some strategy pieces up front because people need to know. We were at a 4th of July party last week, and I was talking to a gentleman, the father of one of my friends, and his A1C was borderline pre-diabetic. And he's like, well, what do I need to do? And I was like, definitely watch your carbohydrate intake, really reducing the added sugars. And it's so obvious to me when I say these things, right? And then I watch him load his plate for dinner, and there's a hamburger bun, and then he has this mini Mountain Dew. And I'm like, how did we get here? We just had this conversation about lowering carbohydrates, and now you're having a pop and a processed white bun. I'm not quite sure what's not clicking here. And so I want to be very clear. Please do not drink any pop. If you want to really lower your insulin and your blood sugar, drinking pop is the worst thing that you can do, period. So switching to an alternative lower sugar option, like a naturally essenced water, is a good choice. If you're not really wanting to give up the flavor of pop, there are Zevias out there that are sweetened with stevia. Poppies have 5 grams of added sugar compared to 40 grams of added sugar with the Pepsi. So there's always that good, better, best option, but we want to reduce added sugar as much as possible. That also goes into reducing processed food, because we know added sugar is in over 80% of processed foods. Anything in the grocery store that comes in a bag that has color, it's so crazy. If you open up all the candy, this is so interesting. Open up all the candy and it's all brown. It's just it's colorful on the outside because that tricks our brain to think that it's healthy, because the fruits and the vegetables that actually are healthy for us are all colorful. So they put these bright colors on the packages. But if you're actually looking at the cereals, if you're actually looking at The granola and the candy, it's all just brown processed food, unless there's added food coloring, of course. So reducing processed food is one surefire way that you're going to reduce your added sugar. And please, 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 please start looking at the added sugar line on your nutrition label. We could have a 4-hour masterclass, the two of us, on what to look at on your food label, but I'm keeping it very surface level for people like my friend's dad, who it's like, I had a conversation with him and then he did not make the change. And I'm just like, do you not think it's that bad? Like, do you not think that one pop here and there is what's causing that? Because that's what it is. It's one pop here and there. It's a couple pops a week. It's like your baseline habits have to change. And that's why we're so well aligned on our messaging is it's a habit. I think we all have this rhythm of life with our nutrition, and we have got to reduce the sugar. After you get rid of the added sugar or significantly reduce it, it's time to really look at what carbohydrates you're eating, because out of the 3 macronutrients, there's carbohydrates, there's proteins, there's fat. Guess which one is going to spike the blood sugar the most? It's the sugar. Carbohydrates are sugar. You got starch, you got sugar, you got fiber. Fiber's not going to spike your blood sugar, not going to spike your insulin. We're not talking about fiber here. Talking about the starches and the sugars and the cereals and the granola bars and the bread and the hamburger buns, the hot dog buns, the rice, the pasta, the bagels, the English muffins. I'm trying to be very specific in case people just are overlooking, right? It's like, oh yeah, low carb diet, and then I'm going to go have my English muffin. I'm like, that's not how this works. We really need to understand nutrition better. And so once people understand, well, where are all the carbohydrates that I'm eating? Because they're probably eating way more carbohydrates than they're giving themselves credit for. Understand that. And then I think focusing on protein is very important too. So I usually do about 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. Maybe not a realistic body weight for them, at least in their mind at this point in time. But starting at just 30 grams a meal is a great baseline goal. What does that look like? Because I told my friend's dad at the 4th of July, he's like, that means nothing to me. I'm like, okay, let me try to break this down. So if you take the size of your hand, that should be about the portion of protein. It's going to be more than what you're used to eating. So put your hand on top of the plate. A hamburger, for example, it depends on how thick it is too. But if the steak is cut up or the chicken is cut up, it should be about the size of your hand, not necessarily like a piece of steak this size or a piece of chicken this size, but once the meat is cut up and kind of clumped together on your plate. So 30 to 50 grams of protein a meal, that's going to help with your satiety or staying full between meals. It does have a moderate insulin response. However, remember, insulin is like the master director. And so if it senses an influx of amino acids from the protein, it's going to direct those amino acids to build muscle, to build hair, to build skin. So it's okay that there's a moderate insulin response. Those nutrients are going somewhere else besides your fat tissue, unless you overeat. And then the last thing is really focusing on healthy dietary fats. I'm not anti-saturated fat. I think it just depends on the quality, your personal risk factors for cardiovascular disease, but obviously focusing on those mono unsaturated fats like the olives, the avocados, their oils, the unprocessed polyunsaturated fats like nuts and seeds, fatty fish. Those are excellent sources of dietary fat. They're going to help you feel full. These dietary fats and proteins and fiber, they stimulate the GLP-1s that everyone's trying to do with these medications, these weight loss medications. You can get a very similar effect from changing the composition of your diet, and you don't have to worry about what happens when you go off the medication. So I think that the weight loss medication is having a moment. I think that for the right person, it's great. However, I do believe today I had a really good episode released on my podcast with Dr. Paul Klosdick about proper use of these medications, low dosage, limited time. We have to focus on lifestyle corrections. Those kinds of things, those conversations have to be happening in order to really reverse insulin resistance. So those are some nutritional strategies. I know we could keep talking about other lifestyle things if you want to.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I love that as a coach, right? We're both coaches and health coaches. Like when we say something like you're saying, reduce the added sugars, and somehow it gets lost in
I
translation to
know.
the person. You're like, you get it, your brain gets it. And I think that's why mindset, and I'd love to dovetail more into how you work with clients and their mindset, because I'm with you. If your mind is not on board, it's absolutely almost impossible to carry
Yeah.
out the behavior. So I love that you like, right, we have to slow down and connect with that individual, right? If I say, less added sugar, what is being heard on the other side? Like we may understand the wording, but we may not even understand how to put that into practice. There's like a
Right.
disconnect. So that lost in translation, which is why I think health coaching is so pivotal to getting the habit change. Because if you're not understanding what your healthcare practitioner is saying, or you're not understanding what does it mean to reduce my added sugar, let's have a conversation about that. What is difficult to understand? Or, maybe they don't know how to read labels, or maybe
Yeah.
they don't know how to estimate the amount of protein. Like I love if you're watching this on YouTube, held up your hand and talked about exactly how to measure that easily, right? It's not perfect science, but it's good enough. And as
Yeah.
long as we're getting good enough, we're going to get good enough results. It's not about perfection. It's about, hey, I really want to make this change. Give me some quick, easy things that I can implement that make sense to my mind to get my mind on board and also understand exactly those quick wins that I could get. Because you're right. I was at a 4th of July party and I had, I don't know, are they 10 ounces or 8 ounces, the mini cans of Pepsi? And I turned that around because I was like, oh, I'm kind of thirsty for a Pepsi right now. But it was 32 or I think 30 or 32 grams of added sugar. And I'm like, that's more than an adult should have in one day, like
Yeah.
more than. And that's just like a 10 ounce. And some people drink multiples of those.
Oh, yeah.
So when you could get these quick hits, these quick wins that really make a difference on your joints, how you feel, how much energy you have, how much motivation and drive, because we know too much blood sugar doesn't make us feel motivated and make
No.
us feel our best. We feel puffy, we feel bloated, we feel like yuck.
Lethargic, foggy,
Yes.
like, not motivated. Think about how you feel after you have this huge meal. What do you want to do? You want to go sit on the couch.
Yeah.
And that's it. And you want to zone out. And it's like, what are you missing? What conversations are you missing? What experiences are you missing? How are you missing to contribute? And I think my biggest passion, from a disease prevention standpoint, I know we're both women of faith. It's like God put us on this earth to have an impact, to inspire others, to live our most authentic lives, to live the best version of ourselves in our lives. Like that's what we're called to. And I think that when you are bogged down with excess weight, with poor health, that's almost like shackles or chains, like holding your spirit back, holding your emotional health back, holding your mental health back. It's all tied together. And so I think at the bottom of why do we do what we do? It's like we do what we do to help people be the best version of themselves so they can live out their purpose and their passion and have a ripple effect on their community. But if you're just sitting there spiking your blood sugar, going and chilling on your couch, that is not fulfilling your soul, like your life's mission. So I don't know. I like to talk about that stuff because I feel like this is a very sciencey world that we live in, and people want the strategy. Just tell me what to do. And it's like, I literally just told the guy what to do and he didn't do it. There is a disconnect and it's all in our mind. Like,
Yes.
Any limitation is a limitation of thought. And so I really am passionate to just inspire people. Like, you are meant for such great things. You're meant to have a big impact on your family and your community. And you can only have the biggest impact possible with the best health possible. So that's why we got to focus on this.
I love that so much because we talk about things in silos a lot in medicine, right? It's like let's just get you physically moving. And we might not be talking about the emotional or the mental or the spiritual component, which, when they're all working together, that's when you feel optimal. And there's a lot of people like, I don't know my purpose, or I don't feel like I have meaning since COVID, or things have changed so much and I just don't know how to find my way. And it could be part diet that's, holding you back, making you feel sluggish, making you feel unmotivated, no drive. It could be hormones, right? So, I've had hormones experts on here diving into when we go through the change in perimenopause and menopause. There might be factors to look at there. But yes, what you do and your habits and your daily lifestyle interventions make a huge difference on how you feel, what you're called, if you're able to fulfill your calling, right? Some people may know their calling, but they're not able to fulfill it because they're being held back by, the habits that they have and the lifestyle things that they're choosing. And I love that we come back to, you can make choices, different choices anytime you want. You don't
Yep.
have to stay in the shackles. You don't have to be held back. You can say, okay, I'm done with this. Let me pivot and start investing in knowledge for myself or a coach for myself or some ways that I can really level up so I can be a greater impact for myself and my family and my community. I love that so much.
Yep.
So going down, now that we've kind of opened like the spirituality bucket and the mental health, talk about how you work with patients or what you see when they start making these dietary changes and lifestyle changes, how that impacts their mental health or any mental health strategies or mindset strategies that you help clients with.
Well, you're absolutely right that our diet affects our mind, and a diet that leads to high blood sugar levels. So it's inflammatory. And I had this really good interview with Dr. Georgia Ede. You would love her if you haven't connected with her yet. She's the author of Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. And she's a nutritional psychiatrist. And so she works a lot with ADHD, depression, autism, anxiety, and focuses more on a ketogenic approach so that the brain can start to use ketones instead of glucose, because an insulin-resistant brain, if you're insulin-resistant in the body, you're probably insulin-resistant in the brain too. It just doesn't utilize energy as well from glucose. And so we have to use alternative fuel sources like ketones, which are a byproduct of fat metabolism. So that's kind of her approach, but her book lays out so well that your mental health is directly influenced by your metabolic health. So with this, we have, there are so many people who are depressed and anxious and worried, and so much of their brain power is their personal power to change is being drained out of them through negative thought loops, through worrisome thoughts, through, the shackles of their own mind. And so it's like, okay, we have to address the diet, but we also have to address the mindset. Otherwise, what happens? What happens if you have the best strategy, but no mindset, to back it up, no foundation? You're not going to be consistent, number one. You're going to start and stop. You're going to beat yourself up. You're going to have negative critical self-talk. You're going to be worrisome and anxious. You're going to have a very difficult time focusing on one task. And I think in order to create anything great in our life, we have to have focus. We have to have attention, the bandwidth to do it. And so when you don't have a strong mental system, I call it a mindset system, you're not going to be consistent with anything strategy-based. And you're going to slide. You're going to slip back into your old habits. So we have to have something that really anchors us every day. And I like a morning mindset routine. I think that's the easiest thing to implement because it's fast, it's free, and it's easy. And it takes no physical effort. And it's a great way to build self-esteem and self-confidence. So if you can take the first 15 to 20 minutes of your morning, and instead of getting up and checking your phone or getting up and going straight to work out or getting up and heading to the shower right away and then getting your workday started, take some time in the morning to create intentional margin space for a morning mindset routine. And if people are very new to this, there's something that I like to call it the START daily mindset routine. And the S, it's like an acronym. So S is say your personal faith formula, which in our world is the miracle mindset document that we help you create, that is your wellness vision. How do you want to show up? What actions are you taking consistently? It's really good messaging from yourself to be sure that you're living from your values and you're showing up at your highest capacity every day. So an example of just some example phrases from mine are, I am a patient, calm, intentional, and engaged mom, and loving, supportive, compassionate, and empathetic wife. So I not only focus on health, I focus on roles. I could go on and on. I love that. So
I love that. One thing that comes to my mind is I'm an empowered, loving soul that wants to take care of my health and the health of others.
I love that. So those are the types of things, like we want to figure out what messaging does your brain need to hear. And if you're really struggling with bad habits, this is a great place to implant a different thought. So one thing that I tell myself every morning, I don't snack, overeat, or emotionally eat. I don't eat between meals. I don't eat after meals. I don't finish my kids' foods. So whenever I find a bad habit and I want to work on it, I'm intentional to give myself that messaging every single morning. And that does help. Really, truly, it does. It takes a while, but it helps. So that's the S of the START daily mindset routine. The T is thankful. And when we express gratitude, we really elevate our vibrational state. And gosh, we get out of that negative thought loop, even if it's for an instant. If we're saying something that we're grateful for, which is a skill that can be developed, you're elevating your vibrational state. You're going to be attracting more abundance and love and good things into your life. But I don't want it to be a broad stroke. I'm grateful for my spouse. I'm grateful for my house. I'm grateful for my kids. That's not specific enough. So we want to get very specific, 3 things over the last 24 hours. And if that's too hard, I want people to look in their environment and just start to say, okay, what am I grateful for here and now? And if that's too hard, look at your body. I am grateful for the ability to see. I am grateful for the ability to hear. I am grateful for my sense of taste. I'm grateful that I can touch this soft sweatshirt. Gratitude is a skill. And I was reminded of this not too long ago when my son was whining and I'm like, Dawson, can you just tell me one thing that you're grateful for that I did for you today? And he was like, no, not really. And I'm like, let me do it for you. I did this and this and this and this. And it was so funny because then he's 6 and my daughter Leah is 4. So then another day Leah was, whining and complaining. And Dawson was like, Leah, don't you know everything mom did for you today? She did this and this and this. And I think, you shouldn't treat her so mean. But I was like, yes, it landed. But it was such a beautiful reminder that gratitude is a learned skill. We are not born being thankful. We are born being needy and crying and all this stuff. So we have to train our brains to really be grateful. Now that's S. So say your personal faith formula. T is gratitude, thankful. What are you thankful for? A is action items. So these are very specific goal-oriented action items that you're going to do come hell or high water for today. So I personally like to combine morning and evening routine and write out those action items the night before, but start with the morning routine. And probably 3 to 5 is a good place to start. Any more than that, and you're just going to be out of integrity, right? Because you're going to feel like you're never doing enough. And that's not the point. The point is just to give your brain some clear instructions. So this is not my action item because it's a habit now, but I will drink 3 of these Stanley bottles a day. I will work out for 30 minutes today. I will do my morning. Yeah, we match. I know it's not so cute.
Twinsies.
Yeah. Anyways, so daily action items, I will log my food. I will plan my meals. This is a great time if people want to plan their meals. If they have a weight loss goal, I think that's helpful. They can do that. And then the R is to recognize your wins. And women are so bad at doing this sometimes where we praise other people, but we don't always praise ourselves. So just gratitude is a skill, self-praise is a skill. We want to be our own biggest cheerleader. Both of us have the same coaching philosophy that we don't want you to need us. We want to help you develop the skills to empower you to be able to do this on your own and inspire others then to do it for themselves. We want you to become that lighthouse, but that requires you to tell yourself when you do a good job. So very specific. Yesterday, we were at a friend's house. I took some chocolates in the car for the kids on the way home. I took one for me too. And then it's wait a second. You don't snack, overeat, or emotionally eat, and you don't eat between meals. So what are you doing? Put that thing down. And so I put it in the center console and I didn't touch it until after dinner when I split it with the kids. And it's good for me for being a person of integrity. Good for me for making that one choice. Good for me for not finishing my kids' food. Good for me for doing the workout that I said I was going to do. Good for me for shutting the TV off at 9:30. So that is so important, to learn how to recognize your wins, to develop that self-confidence and that self-esteem and that pride in yourself, that self-worth. It's just like I want to know if you know this. You have such a great quote on your website, and it's like, your self-esteem and your self-worth don't come from what you do for other people. They come from how you feel about yourself, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. I think of it as like self-validation, right? Yes. But
Value.
praising yourself, and just, it always feels good to get a compliment, right, from others. And it should, right? But don't live for that. Live for your own approval.
Yeah. So I was just kind of reading your website before we hopped on. I'm like, wow, that's a really good line. So the last thing is thoughts and obstacles. So START, thoughts and obstacles. I think that when we become aware of what could get us off track today, we can make a plan against it. All right, we got a barbecue tonight. I know there's going to be dessert. What is my boundary around that dessert? How many am I going to allow? What is my stopping plan for eating? I think that's so helpful. So like, how do I know when I'm done? One plate of food, no seconds, immediately put a piece of gum in your mouth and get a sparkling water so that you're done eating at that party. So thinking ahead, like you were mentioning offline, you're going to Napa on a girls' trip. And you're like, but I'm not going to be drinking. So you're planning ahead on those obstacles of like, okay, what are we going to be doing during the times when friends are drinking? How am I going to be in that environment and still enjoy myself? So a person who is successful in reaching their health goals gets very good at self-study. So at self-reflection. We're so obsessed with like the latest book and podcast and course and like absorbing all of this material and being passive learners. And I like to say, that's not going to cut it. We need to be an active listener and an action taker. So only like we learn best from experience, and we have to reflect on that experience to get the lesson that we're supposed to get from it. So as much as we study courses and podcasts and books, I really encourage people to study themselves, to study their own behavior and their own thoughts and their own habits and their own attachments, keeping them stuck, and reflect on those thoughts and those obstacles so that they can choose what they want to think instead, so they can choose an alternative solution. So that's kind of where I would start with anybody, honestly. Like, yes, reduce your sugar. Yes, increase your protein. If you can do that in the snap of the finger, please, by all means, go do it. But if you are the type of person where you very much start, stop, then I highly encourage you to start with a morning routine and build some self-esteem. Because over time, if you don't keep your word to yourself, you lose personal integrity and your brain no longer trusts you to follow through. So we need to build up that self-esteem and self-confidence with something that's easy and simple and doable. And that's why that morning routine is very powerful. Last thing here, you can even just pick like one of those things. If the whole framework's too much for you, start with 5 minutes of gratitude in the morning and just see, like, prove me wrong. I have never had a day where I did my morning mindset routine and my day was worse off because of it. But I have had days where I skip my morning mindset routine and then I'm feeling frazzled throughout the day, or my attitude isn't as good, or my attention is not as sharp as it should be. So prove it to yourself with these small little wins, starting with that morning mindset routine.
I love all the strategies you give. And particularly what I love most is sometimes the brain likes novelty, right? To hear things in a new way, or buy something that's like a quick fix. Like we were talking at one of the networking events I go to, like, what is the silliest thing you bought from an infomercial? And I remember I bought the Thigh Master. Do you remember that device you would close in with your thighs? Because I didn't like the size of my thighs. And we were always looking for that quick fix. And it's not to say other tools outside of us don't help, right? The Thigh Master could have done some work. But if I wasn't working on my mindset about loving my thighs the way they are, the way I was created, like, I'm not going to have size 0 thighs. It's just not how my body is created. And doing this mindset work and then turning that tide to like, oh, I could be thankful for my thighs, even though they're not like how society defines them to be the shape that's going to make the runway. But I don't really want to be a runway model. That's not my goal in life. So really checking in where our thoughts are leading us to feel bad about ourselves, having that awareness, studying yourself, all of these things which are low cost or no cost, right? If you want to write them down, there might be, the cost of a notebook and a pen. But I think it's really helpful to do that analysis for yourself and say, oh, I don't line up with what society thinks is successful in this area, or that's not my calling, is to be a runway model with, little thigh fat or whatever. But it doesn't mean I'm not worthy or I can't contribute in a different way or I'm built differently. And I really want to work on accepting myself as is. I think that's so beautiful to have that time to say, okay, this is where I'm feeling pressure from society, but that doesn't really fit my mold and the way I'm created and the way I want to show up in the world. I don't want to be embarrassed of my thighs. I just have thighs. So giving these different tools is so good. And I did want to comment, because I had a different analogy that I wanted to share with the listeners as well, is that you talk about when you go to an event, right? Or when I go to Napa, I have my idea of what I'm going to do on Sunday when the girls have the limo taking them to all the different wineries, and I'm not partaking in that part. But it's like what we learn about NFL players or Tom Brady, they always have that pregame strategy. When they go to any football game, they're not winging it. They're not making up things. They had
Right.
thought about the win ahead of time. They had thought about how they're going to feel when they win the next Super Bowl and how they're going to compete against this team at this event. So their strategy differs based on the players who they're playing and the conditions and the environment. And is there snow or not snow? So anybody who gets phenomenal results in their life, it's not happenstance.
No.
So I love that you break it down into these different areas that we can start small and build on to be intentional about those results that we get for our lives. Because if you want results, it does require intentionality that you bring to that. And nobody goes into, oh yeah, I just happen to be a bodybuilder. Right? They work at that. And it takes so much of not just the action, but also the mindset. And I like how you broke it down into that framework for us. So powerful.
I know after I had one of my children, my cousin, I lost the weight quickly because I had good habits. And my cousin's like, oh, you're just a unicorn. And I'm like, have you seen those reels? I have not done one of these, but where people are when people say you're just naturally slim, or when people say you're so lucky to have a nice body. And then the next shot is the luck. And it's all the work they're doing, the cooking, the exercise, the mindset stuff. Anybody who is successful on the outside, I think this is true. I say that because I think success may not be the right word. When you really meet somebody who is authentically living the best version of themselves, they're probably going to look great on the outside, but they're going to feel great on the inside too. And I think that's so important because there are people out there who have that facade of success, but maybe there's another area in their life that's not successful. Their relationships are falling apart, or their finances are falling apart, or, they're not fulfilled in their faith or their career. And it's I really want to encourage people that when you have this foundation of health and you live a values-driven life, every single area of your life will elevate. It's kind of like when the tide comes in, all the boats rise. That's what this mindset stuff does. That's why I'm so passionate about the mindset side of things, because yes, we can apply it to health, but you can also apply it to your finances and your relationships and your career and how you show up as a parent. This mindset side stuff that I learned, oh my gosh, it has made me such a better parent. I'm so much less reactive. I'm so much more patient. I'm able to just like you said, project, how do I want to show up in this situation, and then actually do it. So that, I think, yes, this is a health podcast. However, both of us are so freaking motivated to help people be the best version of themselves in every single area of their life. Yeah. And that is why this mindset stuff matters.
Yeah. I'd be curious to know if you're willing to share, what are some of your values?
Oh, yeah. I feel like it depends on the space that I'm in. So we have different family values compared to work values. starting with the family, like my life values, family is one for sure. And I think that you can tell what you really value, what you truly value by where you spend your time and your attention and your energy. So if people are like, well, I don't really know, look how you're spending your time. So family, my life revolves around my schedule, revolves around my kids' schedule, and my husband and I are very intentional to spend time together every day. My faith is very important to me, so I like to read scripture every morning if I can when I choose to make time for it, which I try to choose every morning to do that. We like to go to church as a family every Sunday and just bring that aspect into our relationships. I think having that spirit, like that spiritual, faith-minded perspective is so helpful in today's day and age to not worry about the small stuff, not sweat the small stuff. Actually, a unique one for our family is relaxation, which I think is not something that we're very good at yet, but we value it. And my husband works so hard. He's a farmer. I work very hard. And what that looks like, how does that value manifest? No more than one sport per season for a kid. We're not in piano lessons. Our kids are not going to gymnastics. They're not doing dance. Why? Because I don't want to be spending my time driving them everywhere. I want to be relaxing at home with them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to create a culture, like a rushed family culture. We want a relaxed, easy family culture. So, they can do one sport at a time. That's one very practical way. Another is we make time for vacations. We go on at least probably 2 family vacations a year. They don't have to be anything super expensive or anything. My husband and I prioritize a date night every month. So different things like that. My morning mindset routine is a form of relaxation. So those would be and then health, I would say, is another kind of value. So family, faith, health, relaxation at this season in our life, I'd probably say that's where we're at, because a lot of our actions and decisions revolve around our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, and our financial health. So we're very intentional for those areas. And then for work, from a company standpoint, have you heard of Brene Brown's Braving Trust?
Yes.
I really like that. I probably couldn't spout off what it means, but it's an acronym, BRAVING, Braving Trust. Everybody can look it up. It's a beautiful acronym. So we want to trust our team members. Integrity, we want to live by our word.
Mm-hmm.
And excellence is another one. We want to perform at a high level. And work-life harmony is a core value of our company. So I work hours that work for my family. Every single person that works for me works hours that work for their family. Our business will bend to the needs of our families, not the other way around. So that's very important to me as a leader, to lead by example, to not work in the evenings all the time, to not work on the weekends all the time, to have healthy boundaries around my work and my family time, and to support the boundaries of the people that work for me. So those would be kind of my values. I'd love to hear yours too. I love having conversations about values and getting to know people on a deeper level. So what would you say yours are?
Exactly. And I just really want to commend you first before I go there is being a female leader can be challenging because sometimes I think there's this impression that if you are direct, like myself, I'm very direct, I'm not a lot of fluff in my emails, you can be taken to be a B word or, not kind, whatever, right? So I think when you get to live out your values and your intentions and why you communicate that, like every member of my team knows I'm a direct communicator. I don't mean to offend or say something, that's mean. I don't ever say anything mean, but my style is directness. And I love that in return. Like, Sherry, this went wrong and here's why, right? I don't want sugarcoating or anything like that. So I think you portraying your authenticity and your values and living that out is a pure representation and breaking some of the molds that we have as females, that we can't be this or we can't be that, or our jobs can't be that flexible. It's okay, that, and I love that you're designing a system that works for you and living that out. I think that's so powerful. So I was thinking about some of your answers. I'm like, oh, that's good. I might want to take that one. Funny thing, my brain with relaxation, you know how everything's like words and our words can stimulate like good emotions or bad emotions. When I heard relaxation, I'm like, oh, I can't do that. And here's why. Instantly, my brain thought, oh, that's lazy. And it's so interesting.
I'm still working on it.
Right? But I do have a value and I do talk about it a lot, but I just don't use the word relaxation. I use leisure. Leisure to me feels
I like that better.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like I'm resting on my laurels and not taking action that should be taken.
Yeah.
So I like leisure, and I tie leisure into travel because we are a family that loves to travel. It just opens my mind when we, visit other cultures, even different parts of the United States open my mind, right? How people live, what they eat, how they, what they do. So it's just interesting to me a lot. It expands my mind. And I know it does for my husband. I know it does for my daughter. We value as a family travel. So actually we travel quite a bit, which I don't apologize for. I love that we get to travel and I could take my business on the road. It's fun and I love it. And sometimes I'll even meet up with people that from the podcast or my clients out there, and they're like, hey, I'm in this city. And they're like, oh, could we meet up? And I love that. Connection is a big one for me now because I realized through COVID, I became a little depressed during that time, being away from, the church, being away from my activities that took me away and out of the house. So now last year, that was my word of the year was connection because I valued in person, hugging people, looking at people, being with people, feeling their energy. I'm thankful for Zoom and all the things we can do on Zoom, but I really love the 3D person. Like that just makes me come alive. Yeah. Health is a big one. And then you mentioned it as well as integrity. And for me, it's like integrity is living out what I say I'm going to do. I don't just say it, but I actually do it. So integrity is very big for me. And that's what I feel our big ones are as a family. And truth telling, no matter how much it hurts, we're just, again, that might be part of my philosophy of directness. I just want to hear from my daughter, from my husband, from anybody, from my clients. Like if I give you coaching and that doesn't feel good, tell me and tell me what doesn't feel good so I can help modify my behavior to better meet your needs. And I know that all brains work differently and I am accepting of that. And I just want to do my best to help get somebody where they want to go. So I love the directness. I think that has to be a value of mine too.
Yeah, I like all those. And I wanted to highlight health was both of ours. I had a client once and she was in a leadership position and she had like this 12-month very in-depth leadership course that she was going through. And she had a values identifying day essentially. And she's like, I realized that health is not one of my values and I want it to be. And I think that's so interesting because I think a lot of people listening, like they want to be healthy, but health isn't a value. How do you know? Because you can tell where you spend your time, attention, and money.
Yes.
And so spend more of your time, attention, and money on things to get healthy and, the coaching, the support, the resources, and eventually that will get there. So I think if you have that desire to have health as a value, but you're not living it out yet, that's okay. Just try to like that honor where you're at and like keep moving towards that value.
Love that. And speaking of, I'd love for you to talk about your program, Zivli, and what you offer and how people can work with you.
Yeah. So our Zivli program is a 12-week online course, and we have a really lovely curriculum that I put together to help people reverse insulin resistance, prevent insulin resistance. We cover nutrition, intermittent fasting, exercise, stress, sleep, mindset, like systems for changing habits, all the good stuff. And then there's group coaching, there's accountability pods with other members. It's a great program. That opens again, it's a couple times a year. Next is in September of 24. So whenever someone's listening, they can always join our wait list, but the next open enrollment is in September. And they can go to zivli.com/join to get on that wait list. They can also check out a ton of free resources. My podcast is Reshape Your Health. Our YouTube channel is Dr. Morgan Nolte, Zivli. There's a really great insulin resistance for beginners playlist that's chocked full of valuable information on what to do about insulin resistance. So I always recommend people start there.
Wonderful. And it's Zivli, correct?
Correct.
Zivli. Yeah. Just so I know sometimes you hear things and it's like, how does that spelled? So I love when just to spell it out. Well, Morgan, it's been a delight, a pleasure, and a dream of mine to have you on the podcast. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And listeners, I hope you found this episode helpful. Please like it, send a comment, a review, and please check out Morgan Nolte's work. Thank you so much, Morgan.
Thanks, Sherry. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening to the Health Habits and Epic Living podcast. If you're ready to take the next step to improve your health, wellness, and lifestyle goals, head over to www.epicyou.com and sign up for my weekly newsletter. Again, that's EPICYOU.com. Please note that the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice.